I am originally from a major city in southern Ohio, and several smaller townships surround it. One of these is referred to as the more country bumpkin redneck section of town. It is not even in the same county but close to my city. In the woods, there's a legend about Hell's Church, either an old church that burned down where Satanists perform rituals, or a Satanist church that burned down during a ritual, depending on who you ask. There are several Hell's Church myths in Ohio and other locations, but this one was the closest to us. Several of my male friends decided they wanted to be ghost hunters and investigate haunted places near where we lived. We were juniors in high school, and while we all obviously thought this was ridiculous, we thought it was funny to go out and scare ourselves. Furthermore, most people now have cars or driver's licenses, so we are experiencing a new sense of freedom. I'm a scaredy cat about most things like this, but I was the most tomboyish girl in the group and always wanted to be able to hang with the boys. Plus, some girls in the group I was closer to were going, so I avoided appearing as a loser or a oh. So, one day in November, we decided to go out one night and look for this church. We had previously visited this location in the fall, but one of my friends was on a curfew, so we left after exploring an old barn and railroad tracks on a nearby bridge. We hadn't found the church, which was supposed to be just a chimney, much to our disappointment and mild relief. We took 2 cars out there, passing through more populated areas of our city before returning to this wooded area. I can't even tell you how we got there, but it's off a state highway, then an abandoned access road past an old warehouse, and finally down a dirt road. When you get down that dirt road, there's a thicker section where we parked the cars off the shoulder early. We did this because the road narrows and becomes impassable, and it is clear that someone owns the land. Later down the road, there is a no trespassing sign. I'm sure many kids return here, so it didn't seem strange that they wanted to block off this area. I barely thought about it then. We leave our cars and walk down the dirt road, occasionally deviating from the path to look for barns or clearings where we believe the chimney could be. At first it was scary because it was dark and old, but then the barns began to get strange. They were filled with strange spray-painted symbols and a mo. But that wasn't what bothered us. We assumed whoever came before us did it, which I still believe entirely. But there were also dead owls that looked like they had been opened, though they had dried out and decomposed by the time we arrived, as well as other bits that appeared to have come from animals. I was grossed out, but we all agreed that these were most likely from the same teenagers attempting to stage a satanic ritual, or that the animals became trapped in the collapsing barn and died there, only to be picked apart by other animals. My friends were now desperate to find the stupid chimney, so they ran through the trees into clearings. The other 2 girls and I hung back on the tree line for most of it, becoming increasingly nervous and irritated as we came up empty. We kept going until we came across a bike on the tree line that looked like it belonged to a 12-year-old. That's a little creepy, but okay, whatever. It probably belonged to someone who owned the property. We decided to go a little further and eventually found another bike. This one was older, slightly rusted, but still undersized. We didn't say much about the other bike, we just mumbled that it was probably nothing. One of the 2 or 4 guys there was trying to up the ante, saying things like, "These kids probably got murdered or something," but no one was buying it. We had been there for about 2 hours and it was late. Plus, we were all more creeped out than we wanted to admit. We decided to return to the cars and I felt relieved to be on my way home and out of there. But it never works out that way, does it? A road leads straight up a hill through the trees visible from the cars. We had seen a large metal gate with a road closed sign at the start of it before, but for some reason, we had never considered going up the road. We had a brief debate at the gate, with an even split on who wanted to go up and who did not. I didn't want to, but we finally decided to go up just to see. We had little control over the situation because both drivers wanted to go. We climbed over the gate and began climbing the hill, where an old pavement road cracked and crumbled beneath our feet, though it had undoubtedly been a real asphalt road at some point. In addition to the road's condition and the brush, someone had intentionally knocked many trees over the path, blocking the road from any cars. Some of us seriously questioned whether we should be doing this, claiming that someone was clearly trying to keep us out. but we were teased for being afraid and kept going. I couldn't see where the road ended because it was so dark. We had a few flashlights that could have been more useful, and the trees made it difficult to see. Plus, the road was extremely steep, so all you could see was up, with a sliver of moonlight peeking through the trees. But all of a sudden we arrived at the end. The trees had just opened up, and we had come down the incline to a flat field, and holy, what a sight. It's a flat field with tall prairie grass on either side, about 2 to 3 feet tall and relatively uniform. The path we were on divided the large clearing we were in down the middle, leading through the grass to a cul-de-sac with 3 buildings. It appears that there are farmhouses and 1 varnish building. They were made of wood, and while they may have once been painted, they seem to have been weathered and stripped over time. I see this and I'm done. I want to leave. Of course, some of my friends insisted we check out these buildings. At this point, I finally put my foot down and asked the other 2 girls and one of our guy friends, who decided this was also sufficient for him. He was our valedictorian, so perhaps he was more innovative. So the 3 guys who want to go to the buildings tell us to just wait there. And while we don't want to be in this open field, we can't leave them. We've turned off our flashlights because the moonlight is so strong. The 3 of them take off down this small path, leaving the 4 of us standing together, bitching about how stupid our friends are and making small talk. None of us say it, but we're all looking at the grass occasionally, wondering if something will jump out. This abandoned little settlement was highly creepy. It feels as if our friends have vanished forever. We see them approach a building and enter. I believe it was unlocked. We can see the flicker of their flashlights in the windows, and I remember the atmosphere being tense. It was like watching a horror movie in real life. After about 10 minutes, though it could have been a tense 5, we see our guy friends approaching us, lightly jogging and looking terrified for the first time all night. "You idiots went inside," I said, pissed off at them. One of my friends looked at us. I will never forget it. It was packed with bikes, just bicycles chained to the walls. We didn't believe them. We kept waiting for them to say they were kidding, but they insisted, saying it was just a bunch of bikes there, most of which were smaller. They appeared terrified, and as much as I did not want to believe them, I did. They're not the type of guys to play pranks for this long. By then, we've all agreed that we must get out of there, so we start down the hill as quickly as possible. Suddenly, about halfway down the field, we notice a car's headlights down the hill near our vehicles. We see them go slowly, and we know someone is looking for us because we're far off the beaten path. We figure it's one of 2 things. 1, the cops will arrest us for trespassing. Or 2, the owners of this land or these houses. We know the road isn't long, so they'll be turning around and circling back soon. And because our cars are there, they'll most likely wait for us. We're all whispering about it as we pick up our pace and sprint down the hill as quickly as possible. I'm not a fast runner, but I was hauling ass and getting down as soon as I could, basically hurtling over the fallen trees. We don't see any headlights as we descend the hill, but we know they must be nearby. "Get in the damn cars," one of our friends yells, and we fumble with the doors like it's a horror movie. We're just too nervous to enter. We get in, and as we start the cars, we notice the headlights speeding down the road, a massive black truck roaring behind us. The vehicle appeared to be larger than life, raised off the ground. The whole thing was terrifying, but what made it even more frightening was that we couldn't see who was driving, in the dark with headlights blinding us. We get out of there as quickly as possible. This truck is still following us, bearing down on us as our 2 cars accelerate out of there. The car is also getting dangerously close, almost as if attempting to run us off the road. We're all screaming, looking back at the truck, fighting for space. When we reach the highway, we switch lanes to escape. Fortunately, we were in sedans, making it easier to weave in and out of cars, but this truck still chased us. We're in 2 different lanes, but want to stay together with our friends. The passengers in both cars are texting back and forth, attempting to devise a plan. It took us about 15 minutes to lose the truck. I'm not sure if the distance was too far or if they turned around, but when we arrived at a large shopping center, we ducked off the road and into a Sonic parking lot. We all sat in our cars for a few minutes, ensuring we weren't being followed, before getting out to get some food and talk. Everyone was shaken up, including the guys who had tried to be challenging the entire time. It took us a while to calm down enough to return home. No matter how much we talked, we couldn't figure out what had happened. We eventually drove home in silence, exhausted and terrified. We didn't talk about it again for a long time, and we never reported it to the police, which, as adults, I believe we should have done. I don't think about it much, only in the fall. But when I do, I ask myself, who pursued us? Why was the town abandoned? Who owns those bikes, and where are they? Let me start this story by explaining why I was traveling alone. Kayla, one of my best friends, and I spend the summer working seasonally at a hiking lodge in British Columbia. We are both girls in our early 20s. She lives and attends school in New Brunswick, while I live and work as a chef in Toronto during the winter. After purchasing a car this year, we embarked on an epic Canadian coast-to-coast road trip rather than flying home. Everything was going great, so much that we stayed longer in a few unexpected places, forcing us to cut the East Coast portion of our trip short. Kayla began school on November 1st, so I dropped her off at her home in New Brunswick on Halloween. After spending the night at her place, I planned to return to Toronto the next day. However, after a few glasses of Chardonnay and some laughs, I realized that I could only come this close to the East Coast by visiting the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia, which had been on my bucket list for years. Knowing I still had a week of vacation before starting my winter contract, I booked a hostel along the Cabot Trail the next day, November 1st. There was only one option available, likely because I had booked at the last minute, a private dorm with a queen-size bed for $35. I thought it was a bargain and booked it right away. I left Kayla's house at 7 a.m., expecting a long drive. The Cabot Trail is approximately 150 kilometers long, so I entered the hostel's address into Google Maps and drove straight there to get my bearings. I expected to arrive around noon. I planned to check in, explore some nearby hiking trails, and then return later to bring in my bags. As I approached the hostel's location, as shown on Google Maps, I was surrounded by farmland. "Your destination is on your left," Google said, but I saw nothing. About 50 yards ahead, I noticed a large wooden sign shaped like the letter A and spray-painted bright red. I assumed this was the location and took the dirt road leading to what could only be described as a dilapidated barn. There was no signage, but 2 cars were parked outside, so I pulled up beside them and got out. A man in his mid-40s with dark hair and intense eyes emerged from the barn and inquired if I was staying there. I confirmed that I am. He asked why I booked at the last minute, and I explained my situation. He was satisfied with my response and insisted on taking me on a tour of the facility. I first noticed that the entire barn had been dug out around the foundation, measuring about 5 feet deep and 3 feet wide. He led me across some particle board, which served as a ramp into the barn. The second thing I noticed was that there were no windows. It was clearly a barn for livestock. Kevin, who turned out to be the owner, enthusiastically told me about his ambitious plans for the space. It all seemed far-fetched, given that it was essentially just an old barn with particle board separating the rooms. He led me up some plywood stairs to a loft area where I would stay with his family, his 5-year-old son, his wife, and his elderly mother, whom he insisted I call Mom. The room was open concept, with a flimsy curtain separating the beds. I inquired whether I was the only guest, and he confirmed I was. Feeling uneasy, I told him I wanted to go for a hike before it got dark. Kevin gave me detailed directions to his favorite trails, and I left, eager to escape the bizarre situation. As I hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I figured I'd made a last-minute reservation, and beggars can't be choosers. After hiking until sunset, I decided to go find dinner in a nearby town. Unfortunately, the town appeared wholly abandoned during the off-season. Most establishments were boarded up, and even the liquor store was closed. I eventually found a dingy bar and ate a less-than-ideal dinner. Tired and disappointed, I returned to the hostel and read my book. When I returned around 8 p.m., I could smell the family preparing dinner. Kevin's young son, JP, greeted me enthusiastically and asked if I wanted to play catch. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed, and we played catch in the main area. Meanwhile, Kevin and his wife began arguing loudly at the dinner table. I attempted to ignore it, but it quickly escalated into full-fledged yelling. I told JP I needed to call my mother, but he followed me back into my curtained-off room instead of leaving. Things took an unusual turn when Kevin's wife stormed in, grabbed JP, and yelled at her husband. When he became angry, she said something about knowing what he was like and hurried out of the barn with JP, speeding away in a car. Kevin, now alone, stomped outside and turned on the excavator I had seen earlier. I was left alone with Mom, who insisted I continue to call her that. She rubbed my arm and explained that her daughter-in-law did not understand Kevin. She was holding a knife the entire time, which made me extremely nervous. I politely told her that I needed to leave. She tried to persuade me to stay, claiming that JP had predicted my arrival. As soon as I walked out the door, I dashed to my car and started it. But Kevin had blocked the driveway with the excavator. He apologized and asked me to stay while Mom stood nearby, still holding the knife. They argued for a few minutes before I threatened to call the police. Kevin eventually moved the excavator, and I sped away, driving across the grass to escape. As I left the property, I attempted to call my friend Kayla but discovered that I had no cell service. There had been no service in the area all day, so I couldn't have called the cops earlier. I drove 6 hours straight to New Brunswick to stay with Kayla. In the fall of 2015, I started college in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere. Its population as of 2019 is 55,000. This town was in the heart of my Midwestern state, the Great Plains. The college was primarily responsible for the town's existence. It was a state college that had approximately 20,000 students per year. As expected, the college attracted many faculty and businesses, firmly establishing the town's reputation. I personally stood out like a sore thumb. Despite living in the Bible Belt, I had been a Wiccan since I was 15. When I was old enough to understand the Christian faith, I never identified with Jesus or God. My ability to accept others is an essential aspect of my personality. I mention this because it eventually resulted in some chaos. I'm the class clown and mom friend type. I'm sure you know the type, goofy and caring, and it's basically ride or die. So I was in the middle of nowhere at the start of my college career, surrounded by strangers who were equally nervous and awkward. Because I lived in the Bible Belt, my friends adored my tarot card medium future-seeing persona. While making new friends, I met a few people who wanted to learn to read tarot. We lived in the same dorm complex. They were friendly, and I enjoyed teaching, so I collaborated with Alex, Davis, April, Sam, Rosie, Katie, and Sky. They were friends from the previous year, so I was absorbed into the friend group as the newest, shiniest object. The group was thrilled when I mentioned that I read tarot. I led a tarot reading for the group one afternoon in the basement of our dormitory. It was a lazy fall day in mid-November, surrounded by soda cans, Kit Kats, and our homework. I began reading each of the group members' cards. Readings allow you to peek into a person's soul. Each card reveals a sliver of who they are. I frequently have to console people about the truth within the reading. I frequently have to play the role of a therapist after the cards rid people for filth. So it was unsurprising that the group sat stunned and curious, goosebumps prickling their arms. It was a normal response. Hours flew by. I performed general readings, question-based readings, love life readings, you name it. As time passed, more of my talent slipped away. Soon I was reading palms, offering psychic advice, and discussing my Wiccan journey. Whatever you take from the earth, you should give back. It is inherent in my belief system to do everything with love and to never intend ill will. Alex asked if I could teach them about my beliefs. Katie and Davis eventually followed suit. Before I knew it, everyone in the group had requested an impromptu teaching. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy teaching, but I craved the positive attention. My childhood was terrible. I was severely abused. I just wanted people to care about me. These people were among the first to show genuine concern for me and an interest in what I had to say. So, with rose-colored glasses, I started a fun little information session with my brand new friends. I didn't notice the warning signs. What began as small meetings in study rooms quickly evolved into hour-long lectures in which the group hung on every word I said. As we got closer, more of my horrific past was revealed. I told stories about my trauma, the times I should have died, the beatings, and how my mother attempted to murder me. I thought I'd discovered my tribe. I was very excited and happy to be around people. I noticed the warning signs when it was too late. Things went well for a while. A routine of teaching the group, hanging out, eating dinner, and discussing everyday topics like school and what was going on in the dormitory communities. Things felt pretty standard, and I enjoyed it. Davis, one of the group members, was transitioning from female to male and struggled to identify himself. He was raised in a strict household, so his family could have been better for his transition. He also struggled with BPD, which I believe made some members of the group uncomfortable because they didn't understand. Davis would occasionally act erratic, starting fights, becoming agitated, crying at random, and so on. I'm sure some of this was due to transition. I can only imagine how emotional and difficult it would be to go through that. Davis's doubt about whether he should fully transition set things off. Davis had been on testosterone for a long time and appeared very male, but he had not yet had top surgery. Davis wore a dress, makeup, and heels around campus the day before spring break. I thought it was strange at the time, but I figured it was Davis's life, so it didn't matter. The rest of the group, however, became obsessed with this. It was extremely out of character, but the group suspected there was more to it. Alex began to speculate when Davis left for class, dressed in his dress and heels. There was a long, strange history between Alex, Davis, and Sky, one in which Davis flirted with Alex and Sky, causing animosity. Alex and Sky were best friends, but Davis had worked his way into their hearts. Alex could not talk about their feelings, so they pretended the love triangle did not affect them. But Alex had grown bitter. After Davis had left, Sky and Alex discussed their theories. What is wrong with him? Why is he acting that way? Katie, who enjoys gossiping, added, "It's as if I barely know him. It's as if Davis is an entirely different person. I'm not sure who this is, but I hate him. He is taking advantage of Sky." The rest of the conversation started to snowball. It was frustrating for those who had been friends for a long time. I was pretty indifferent. I had no idea what was happening, and I honestly believed these people were making a big deal out of nothing. If you're uncomfortable with what's going on, talk it out. I digress. I was working on a term paper and not paying much attention to the conversation until April asked, "Do you think he could be messing around with some bad magic?" I shrugged. Davis inquired about love spells and other topics I am unfamiliar with. He believed he could cast a spell on someone and make them fall in love with him. I'd told him that taking away free will is something you should never do. The universe is not kind to those who cause harm, obstruct, or deprive others of their free will. April had been there when Davis inquired. April revealed the truth when Alex asked her a question. Alex's expression contorted as if you could see their heartbreak transform into pure rage. Alex excused themselves, and that was it. I remember feeling a little stressed about the situation. I despised conflict back then. I was spending my spring break at Rosie's house. She and Sam lived in the same town. Alex and Katie would also be there. I agreed to spend spring break with them before the drama began, but it was too late to change my plans by the time we arrived. The entire break was spent listening to the conspiracy unfold. The four of them had started to elaborate on their bad magic idea. Rosie wondered if Davis was possessed. I told them that I did not believe it was likely. I had a feeling things were starting to go wrong. Things felt weird. I'd never been in the presence of a group of people who simply accused one another of being possessed. When I rejected the possession idea, they brought up the time Davis growled the week before. We were playing an online game when Davis growled in response. I had jokingly commented that he sounded like a demon. I kept telling them nothing, but they wouldn't give up. Realizing I was in trouble, I devised a quick solution. I told them we could cast some protection spells if anything went wrong. This seemed to satisfy them enough. Fortunately, they left the subject alone until we returned to campus. "We need to do an exorcism on Davis," Rosie said, her eyes wild. Rosie had dabbled in paganism before we met, so she already had robust beliefs and theories. The problem was that Rosie and Sam believed they could use their pagan beliefs to exert control over those around them. I attempted to correct this thought process because it contradicted my beliefs, which they appeared to accept, until they felt threatened. Davis had sent Rosie a text message about some drama with Alex and Sky, sending her into a tailspin. Before I knew it, the narrative had shifted to, Davis is possessed by the demon Lilith. I wasn't sure what to do. I informed them that he wasn't. I said it made no sense. It was all so crazy and unrealistic. I was desperate to calm the situation, but I couldn't tee. Alex had gone from angry to almost gleeful about the situation. It was like a mob mentality, and they wanted Davis out. The more I protested, the more they mocked him, resulting in a highly volatile reaction. My friends formed a tight-knit hive of doom, obsessively studying the theory that Davis was possessed by the demon Lilith. I'd heard the name before but had yet to do much research on it. The rest of the crew began their investigations, becoming obsessed with this character. Rosie spent most of her time figuring out how to perform an exorcism. I decided to play along, hoping they would give it up to bring peace into my life. I took the opposing point of view. I threw out random spells and stories about exorcisms I had seen in the news. I took on the clown role, hoping that laughter would help. It did not work. It only fueled the fire. When we returned to campus, I learned they intended to perform an exorcism on Davis. I was infuriated. I begged them not to. I warned them that messing with the occult, no matter how foolishly, could have serious consequences, but they simply laughed. So I decided to hide from them. I ignored their messages and ended up having to lock my door. I remember lying in bed, listening to my friends' muffled voices outside my door. I heard laughter, anger, and arguments, and I knew they were plotting a way into my room. What I heard next chilled me to the core. I'll never forget the sound of their voices. It sounded like a chant. I sat up in bed, horrified. I panicked when I realized my friends had set up a crude Ouija board in the common area. I had never used one before and was terrified of what they might contact. I begged them to stop, but they just mocked me for not being willing to get crazy. After they had finally quieted down that night, I heard a scratch at my door. Initially, I ignored it, hoping it would go away. But it returned with a low, menacing growl as Davis had done weeks earlier. I jumped out of bed and opened my door, but nobody was there. I felt insane. I could not trust myself or my friends. I felt confused, scared, and alone. I dashed to the bathroom, where I saw my own reflection, wide-eyed, terrified, and pale. Davis left a week later. It was as though the world had swallowed him whole. His name faded from conversations and his desk remained empty. Alex, Katie, Rosie, and Sam were still hanging out, but I had long distanced myself. My small group of friends no longer felt friendly. They felt dangerous. I felt like they had become a cult overnight. A few months passed, and one day I received a message from Davis. I was shocked. I did not expect to hear from him again. He was in another town, several hours away. He informed me that he was doing well and had met someone else. I felt a rush of relief and sadness. It was comforting to know he was okay. I could only hope he had no resentment for me or that group. I quickly texted him back, feeling a huge weight lift from my shoulders. However, events quickly changed. I got an email from a random account with no name. I read the message and got chills down my spine. It stated, "You shouldn't have asked about him." The email was riddled with threats against Davis. I felt sick. I immediately tried to contact Davis again. I messaged him, and all I received were, "Who is this?" responses. My heart sank. He didn't remember me. I turned to face the rest of the group, who laughed it off, claiming Davis was a demon. The madness lasted another 2 months before they finally turned against me. I didn't know how to warn others about the dangers of dealing with powers greater than oneself. I felt trapped. When I finally said enough, they turned on me. Alex yelled at me, saying I was possessed. They claimed that my laughter represented the manifestation of my demon. It felt like I was starting all over again. They kicked me out of the group, leaving me to fend for myself. The air was more relaxed than fall, and the trees began to change color. I spent months alone and depressed. I dropped off social media, became a recluse in my dormitory, and stopped attending class. I was in survival mode. By Christmas, I had packed my bags and left college. I learned a lot that year. One rule: never mess with powers more significant than yourself. 2. Never confide in friends about your trauma. 3. Don't jump into something blindly, even if it's cute and appears to be the ideal lifestyle. I often wonder what happened to my friends. Was Davis indeed a demon, and did they become a sacrifice? Or did they successfully chase away whatever he was up to? I will never know. I wish I had.